There we go. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Lutfur Ali.
It's not started yet, Lutfur. Why stopping? It's not starting yet. Wait for the countdown.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you all. I'm Lutfur Ali, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your moderator today. I want to sort of say a huge welcome, a warm welcome to you all for joining us on this cold November evening. We have a fantastic topic for discussion today for the Muslim Professional Association Forum meeting around the sacrifice and contributions that Muslim soldiers have made for Britain towards the two world wars in the context of a multicultural and pluralistic society. Let me start off by thanking you all for joining us and also thanking our chair, Councillor Khaled Noor, for organizing this very, very important event this evening. I'm also very grateful to our very, very preeminent and accomplished speakers, Professor Ansari and Lord Sheikh. I'm excited and looking forward to listening to their perspectives, their contributions on this topic, as well as all of yours, those of you that are joining us this evening. You should all have received a copy of the agenda this evening, but very, very briefly, starting off with some brief remarks from Councillor Khaled Noor. We shall be hearing very, very short talks of 10 minutes each from Professor Ansari and Lord Sheikh. And around 5:30, inshallah, we shall be opening up the conversation and discussion for questions and answers and further discussions. We hope to conclude the meeting by around 6:15 with final remarks from our speakers and our chair. So without further ado, if I can kindly invite Councillor Khaled Noor, Chair of the Muslim Professional Forum, to open the meeting with a warm welcome. Councillor Khaled Noor.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Thank you very much for Lutfur Ali for your warm introduction. And we are very fortunate and privileged to welcome esteemed speakers, the Lord Sheikh, and also Professor Humayun Ansari. He also an eminent scholar on these particular subjects. My role today to just welcome those speakers and just set a little bit of background information for this event. Why are you hosting this event tonight? Over the last 2 and 3 months, we Muslim Professional Forum, we try to address and bring this issue of Muslim soldiers' contributions during the First and Second World War and the contribution of the numerous personalities, those that are involved, the great wars of just wars on behalf of Britain, so that we can share the information with the large Muslim communities here in the UK. As we are approaching the Remembrance Sunday, that is the following next Sunday, following the tomorrow Sunday, we show our respect and gratitude and our honor to the brave soldiers, Muslim men and women, those tirelessly work and then left their mark for betterment of our societies. So their dedication and their contribution. The Muslim communities in the UK is a growing communities. Muslim community need to understand and to know about those contributed for the betterment of this country, so that we can contribute in the debate about the Britishness and the multiculturalism. What is Britishness is all about and what is multiculturalism all about. When it's come to the issue about the Britishness, we sometimes feel that in different quarters, that one particular dimension is the Britishness. But Muslim community is a part of the society and Muslim make huge contribution Professor Ansari is esteemed authority on this matter, so I will not make any effect, but I want to just to say a few words. During the Second World War, more than 2 million Muslim soldiers, especially from Southeast India and especially Punjab area, they joined in number of the Second World War and First World War. And many of them get a distinguished reward and also recognized for their bravery, including the highest reward of from the crown. So in this context, I think so it's very timely for us to discuss about this issue and also how we can reach to our wider community, because we sometimes felt that once we talk about the British Army, we will always remember the Iraq War, Afghanistan War. But this is the wars we obviously debate and discuss, and there is a lots of controversy around. And we sometimes felt that our army, those are fought for us, that had been put in a difficult position. But those work in British Army and during the First and Second World War, they have the faith in the society and community, and then the British colonial past, and also during this reality. So on this remark, I just wanted to say that I hope that our audience will benefit from this discussion, and I just welcome both of our speakers to share their contribution, and then we'll go for the question and answer session and following our normal program schedule. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Khaled Noor, by very, very insightful welcome. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, which is Professor Humayun Ansari. He is the Professor of History and Islam and Cultural Diversity at the Royal Holloway, University of London, an author, advisor to the Home Office, the Cabinet Office, and the Crown Prosecution Service. Professor Ansari has many other accolades to his accreditation, which requires no further introduction. And what we want to really hear from you, Professor Ansari, given your substantive research and work in this area, is why is this topic particularly important? Why do we need to have this conversation around the sacrifice and contributions made by Muslim soldiers for Britain during both world wars, and why is it relevant for today? Professor Ansari.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, Assalamu alaikum. Delighted to be here with you, and thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. As Councillor Khaled Noor has already noted for us, we are approaching the Remembrance Day next week, and reflecting this evening on the heroism and sacrifice of Muslim soldiers fighting for the British Empire during the two world wars is timely. So let me begin. So countless First and Second World War memorials around the world emblazon Muslim names representing the tens of thousands of Muslims who have stood as part of this nation, who fought bravely and who fell defending this country in corners near and far all around the world. The poignancy of this should not be lost on any of us, especially Muslims for whom Britain is home. There is ample evidence to suggest that thousands of Muslims loyally fought and died on Britain's behalf, but their sacrifice has rarely properly been acknowledged. Only now is the heroic story of how Muslims from Britain's far-flung empire held the line during the First World War is beginning to emerge out of their letters written in the trenches of the Western Front in France and by the wounded in England's hospitals. We now know that at the start of the First World War, within the first months, the British forces took a pounding. Reinforcements were desperately needed. So two divisions of the Indian Army were mobilized, and Indian soldiers deployed on the Western Front. Though they played a crucial part in holding the line, displaying great determination, these soldiers received scant attention in British accounts of the war. Regardless, they fought bravely. Why so? Primarily because soldiering was a respected centuries-old tradition among many Muslim communities in India, particularly communities recruited on the basis of the martial warrior races of the Punjab and North Western frontier. They were materially well rewarded. At the beginning of the war, adverts broadcast His Majesty the Emperor's desperate need for Indian recruits, promising handsome rewards, regular pay, and household expenditure. But honor and loyalty to the regiment, deeply embedded in these soldiers' psyche, was also part of the bargain. This value of loyalty was greatly appreciated by the British officers who led them. And in turn, every effort was made to facilitate Muslim troops in the fulfillment of the requirements of their faith. But what had not been fully recognized is the enormity of the challenge with which Muslim soldiers were confronted in this regard. The real test of Muslim loyalty to Britain came when, in November 1915, the majority of the Indian army was withdrawn from the Western Front to fight in Iraq. That obviously rings a more recent bell. A territory at the time belonging to Germany's Turkish ally. The Ottoman Khalifa was acknowledged by Indian Muslims at the time as the spiritual head of the worldwide Muslim community. Muslim troops arriving there faced Turkish Muslims in combat. What caused them deep anguish and dilemma was the fact that the Sheikh al-Islam in Istanbul had, at the eruption of hostilities in November 1914, declared jihad on behalf of the Ottoman Emperor, urging Muslims all over the world, including in the Allied countries, to take up arms against Britain, Russia, and France. British Muslims, largely ignoring this proclamation, however, continued to support the British war effort. A resolution, for example, proposed by a leading Muslim convert, Lord Hadley, seconded by the Imam of the Shah Jahan Mosque at Woking, Maulvi Sadruddin, and unanimously passed by the British Muslim Society in September 1914, had already expressed, and I quote, the delight to find their co-religionists in Islam carrying into effect the principles of Islam as inculcated by Holy Prophet Muhammad, freely pouring out their lifeblood in defense of honor and for the love of truth and justice. Indeed, they justified Muslim involvement, arguing that this was not a religious but a secular war, even though the conflict had been declared a jihad by the Khalifa. While largely forgotten until recently, at the time, Muslim sacrifices were acknowledged with gratitude. Wounded Muslim soldiers fighting in France were treated in special hospitals along the south coast in Brighton, Bournemouth, and Brockenhurst. Those among them who died received burial rites according to their religion. In 1915, the burial of an Indian Muslim officer took place in the Brookwood Cemetery near Woking. At the request of the Imam of the Woking Mosque, the local commanding officer detailed 50 soldiers, headed by an officer, to attend the funeral in order to pay military honors to the gallant Indian soldier. 3 rounds were discharged, and in a fusion of Muslim practices with British military traditions, the last post was sounded by the bugle boys. At this point, it's pertinent to get a sense of the scale of their sacrifice. By the end of the First World War in 1918, India had sent over 1 million volunteer troops to fight side by side with the British. Muslims were disproportionately involved. They saw action in France and in Belgium, in Gallipoli and Salonika, in East Africa, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Persia. Over 47,000 were killed and 65,000 were wounded. During the Second World War, over 2.5 million men and women from the Indian subcontinent formed the largest volunteer force ever seen in history. They served in Africa, Burma, Malaya, in the Middle East, and in Italy. Again, over 24,000 were killed and 65,000 were wounded. As in the First World War, hundreds of military awards were won. These included 30 Victoria Crosses, the highest award for bravery. As Remembrance Day approaches, our thoughts turn to observance of commemoration of all those members of the British Armed Forces who lost their lives during the wars. Special services will be held and wreaths laid at war memorials throughout the country and at London's Cenotaph. But how many of us will be aware of the magnificent role that thousands of Muslims played in those wars? These men died fighting, defending British rights and liberties and nation's most cherished values. Not Indian, because India, unlike Britain, was far from being free. It was still groaning under the British imperial yoke. Their ultimate contribution reflected the commitment and unity of heroic proportions and deserves to be honored in a fitting manner. And one particular Muslim woman's contribution symbolizes this heroism more than anything else. Noor Inayat Khan, daughter of Inayat Khan, a Sufi musician from Bhopal in India, joined, she did, in the Women's Auxiliary Force, Air Force in November 1940. Later, she was recruited by the Special Operations Executive during World War II. She was airdropped in occupied France in 1943 to gather military intelligence. Betrayed to the Germans, she was arrested in October 1943 and transferred to the notorious Dachau concentration camp. There, she was tortured, but showing immense courage, refused to divulge secret codes. Having attempted escape twice, she was declared highly dangerous and shackled in chains. In 1944, she was executed and incinerated. She was one of the few people to be awarded the George Cross, as well as Croix de Guerre with Gold Star, the highest French and British and French awards for non-combat gallantry. A memorial recognizing her heroism was finally unveiled by Princess Royal in Gordon Square in 2012. Come the 21st century, the 2014-18 centenary commemorations of the First World War offered an important opportunity for British Muslims to recover and remember their collective sacrifices. In the restoration of Woking's neglected early 20th century Muslim burial ground, we now see British Muslims' symbolic inclusion in the national community. Responsibility for the maintenance of this small cemetery, commissioned in 1917 as the First World War took its catastrophic toll of fighting men, passed into the hands of the then newly formed Imperial War Graves Commission in 1921. Derelict and in a state of disrepair, in 1969, with anti-immigrant sentiment on the rise, its graves of Muslim soldiers from the First World War were vandalized, and the racist National Front defaced the dilapidated commemorative plaque at its entrance. Fears that the further desecration of these graves might take place led to their exhumation and transfer to the military section of Brookwood, nearby Brookwood. The original site remained neglected until its recognition by Historic England in 2010 as a structure of specific historic interest. Yet, little attention continued to be paid to its crumbling condition. Only when the First World War centenary loomed on the horizon in 2014 did Historic England have a change of heart and undertook to fund its renovation. In November 2015, with much fanfare, the site was reopened by Prince Edward as a memorial peace garden. Since then, an annual ritual dedicated to an inclusive remembering of the past validates Muslim belonging within wider British society. The last post is sounded, reprising the military honors originally paid to a gallant First World War Indian Muslim soldier interred at Brookwood following his demise at the Western Front. And while this historic space has its roots in colonial memory, local Muslim residents have imbued it with 21st century meaning and value. No longer a marginal memorial located outside the mainstream narrative, the former burial ground is now a shared heritage site, one that directly challenges ingrained histories of empire and creates opportunities for decolonizing British minds more broadly. Thank you.
Professor Ansari, am I unmuted? Professor Ansari, thank you so very much for such an insightful explanation of our historical context around this subject and the importance of this being continued to be remembered, particularly in a week's time next Sunday. I've got a series of questions that I'm going to put to you a little bit later on when it's our question and answers time. But let me, without further ado, invite Lord Sheikh. The brief description of Lord Sheikh. I haven't got enough time to allude to all your achievements, all your contributions that you've made, but just to sort of touch on a few of those: a businessman, an academic, a philanthropist, a writer, and so much more. Of your many different interests and hats that you wear, you're also the founder and chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum and the chair and trustee of the National Muslim War Memorial Trust, which is of particular pertinence to today's discussion. And I could go on, but anybody who's interested in knowing more about Lord Sheikh, his website is full of fascinating information. I would direct people to go to that. So, Lord Sheikh, if I can sort of ask you to sort of highlight the contribution of Muslim soldiers, notably why it's important to remember them during Sunday, if I can just invite you to make your speech, sir.
Thank you, Ali Saab. When you say things like you did, I feel like closing my ears. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. At the outset, I would like to thank Councillor Khaled Noor for asking me to speak today on this important and topical subject. Ladies and gentlemen, on 11th of November, we will be commemorating the Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day is a memorial observed in the Commonwealth and other countries since the end of First World War to honor the armed forces members who have died in line of duty. Remembrance Sunday is the second Sunday in November. As the Sunday nearest to 11th of November, this year it will fall on 14th of November, where a number of events will be held, including one at the Cenotaph. We must pay tribute and remember the sacrifices of everyone who fought to keep our countries safe and free. Unfortunately, the contributions of Muslims to our armed forces is not widely acknowledged and has been historically undervalued. I would like to pay tribute to the Muslims who have served alongside British armed forces and who continue to do so. This is the reason why we have set up the National Muslim War Memorial Trust. I want you to discuss the contribution of Muslims and Indians in the First and Second World War, and the idea of setting up a trust came to me about a year ago. I took part in debates in the House of Lords and elsewhere on this subject when I paid tribute to many Muslims and Indian soldiers and servicemen and women who were part of Britain's war effort. I, with some very high-profile persons, decided to establish a charity, and we have done so. The charity is the National Muslim War Memorial Trust. The trustees of these charities are myself as the chairman, Major General Fataruni as the vice chairman, and the other trustees are Lord Laxton, Mac Chishti, and Muhammad Amin. Lord Laxton is the deputy speaker in the House of Lords. Mac Chishti was the ex-commander in the Metropolitan Police, and Muhammad Amin is a leading chartered accountant, and he was a partner in one of the largest firm of chartered accountants in the city. Ladies and gentlemen, we have issued a brochure, a press release, and also have an excellent website. I would encourage everyone to have a look at our website. We have received publicity in the press. I thought it was important to have young and ambitious individuals involved in the charity so that it is a continuous process. And this is the reason, in addition to the Board of Trustees, we have young people who are our associate members. We have started to look for donations from individuals, institutions, and organizations, and other charities, and we have started to receive support and donation. The seed money for our initiative was donated by the trustees, and all the expenses have been paid. The charity has two important objectives. Firstly, to erect and maintain a public national war memorial to commemorate the services of Muslims in the Britain's armed forces during the two world wars and other conflicts. It is our intention to erect a memorial at a prominent site, I stress the word prominent site, in central London, and then have several other smaller memorials at other sites, such as the National Memorial Arboretum, and also in Birmingham, Manchester, and Bradford, where there are larger Muslim populations. The second objective of the charity is to educate the public about the contribution of Muslims to Britain's armed forces through their role, service, and sacrifices during both the world wars and subsequent conflicts. This education will take place at schools, colleges, and universities, and I have 4 volunteers who already agreed to do so. We have, in fact, built connections with 2 schools, and we are working with the school children at these schools. I spoke on this initiative, our charity, in the House of Lords, and the minister applauded me for what I'm doing, and we have received a letter of support from Baroness Gouldy, who is the Minister of State at the Ministry of Defense. Her endorsement is on our website. Sorry, I've got a bit of a bad throat, so. We've also received support and endorsement from Sadiq Khan. He wrote me a personal letter, and his endorsement is on our website. We have received support from Sir Nick Carter. I had a meeting with Sir Nick Carter, the head of the British Armed Forces. Ladies and gentlemen, education is very important, as this will help to bring communities together and foster harmony between different groups. One of the key reasons we've set up this charity is to combat Islamophobia, and people should realize the sacrifices Muslims have made to keep the Union Jack flying. Telling and building the story of their heroic service will help to build a better Britain for everyone. I would now like to talk about the contributions of Muslims who were a significant part of the British Armed Forces during both the World Wars. And the professor has absolutely done a splendid job in his presentation. So I just add little bits and pieces, Professor, to what you have said. The point I'd like to make is that Muslims from all over the world played a pivotal role in the Allied forces. During the First World War, as the professor has said, the British Indian Army numbered over 1.3 million, and at least 400,000 were Muslim. And I'll also now like to stress that in total, the Muslims from all over the world were 2.5 million who fought for the Allies. So 1.3 million came from India. In total, from all over the world, the number was over 2.5 million. Reports and letters tell us that Muslim soldiers shared their food with local people suffering from famine and food shortages in Europe. And the professors alluded to this. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught his followers to respect women, not to damage the environment, and to treat prisoners of war with respect. And this is what the Muslim soldiers did. The Muslim soldiers felt that enemy soldiers must be treated with respect. And they made this point to their superior officers, because this is what our holy religion teaches us. By World War II, the British Indian Army had grown significantly to 2.5 million. Of this, approximately 1 million were Muslims. In World War II, the total number of Muslims were 5.5 million, who came from all over the world. Muslims, mainly from Indian and African countries, fought in 3 continents and played a decisive role in Britain's first major land victory against the Germans in North Africa. The greatest Muslim contributions as part of the British Indian Army was fighting the Japanese in the Far East Campaign. The East African Campaign was a 4-year guerrilla campaign mainly fought by the King's African Rifles. Ladies and gentlemen, my family came from India, but I was born and brought up in East Africa. And in fact, my uncle, Muhammad Isaac Bhatt, fought in King's African Rifles. He was a sergeant major, and he used to talk to me about his time in Abyssinia when I was a young boy. We have included my uncle's picture on our website, but sadly we could not find one of him in uniform, but he does look very smart in his suit. Hundreds of military awards were won by Muslims. 7 Muslims were awarded the Victoria Cross. The last one was received by Sher Shah in 1945. Hudat Khan VC was the first non-white person to be awarded the Victoria Cross in 1914. He was a Muslim who came from Chakwal in present-day Pakistan. In total, 6 George Crosses were awarded to Muslims, including one to Captain Humayun Ansari, GC, in 1946, who, despite torture, mutilation, and starvation at the hands of the Japanese, refused to renounce his allegiance to the British, and he was beheaded by the Japanese. Again, Professor has alluded to what I'm going to say next. In the World War II, Noor Khan GC was the first female wireless operator sent by Britain to assist the French resistance in 1943. She was executed at Dachau concentration camp in 1944. She was awarded the George Cross in 1949. And I like to stress this. She was tortured by the German, but she never gave up any secret information. That is the spirit. And as she was a descendant of Sultan, what is the name of Sultan of Mysore? Lady Sheikh? Anyway, all right. Now, one of the things we have done on our website is set up a veterans project, and we hope that families of veterans will be able to come forward and share their stories. Ladies and gentlemen, recently I met a veteran who is age 102. He lives in Ilford. Tipu Sultan, Lady Sheikh has just given a note. The name escaped. She was a descendant of Tipu Sultan, indeed, a great fighter who fought the British undoubtedly, but he was betrayed by his prime minister. So I was saying that recently I met a veteran, age 102. He lives in Ilford, and he had the rank of colonel, and he served in the Far East. I was fascinated by this man, and I've got his story on our website. We are looking for more stories, and if you know of any veteran, please get in touch with us, because we would like to include his or her story on our website. Although we started our initiative, we need to make sure that it is continued on ongoing basis, especially education. And I hope that our young associate members can take this forward to keep the charity going. Important that we do this on a continuous basis. Ladies and gentlemen, I personally believe in building harmony between communities, and I'm actively involved in interfaith dialogue. For example, I'm patron of 5 organizations, and 3 of these are non-Muslims. I very much hope that the contributions of Muslims can be appreciated and we can build a cohesive society. I will end by saying that we are actively looking for donations from individuals, institutions, and other charities. We are already beginning to receive contributions, but we are, of course, looking for additional support from everyone. We are looking for help and support from everyone in whatever way they can, which is financial. Otherwise, I'd like to say that I put my own money into the charity. In fact, I've got my staff administrating the charity because I believe that something like this, we must make a success of it so that people know what we Muslims have done for the allied forces. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic, fantastic. Lord Sheikh, thank you so much. Such an insightful, such an educational presentation from you. And what a fantastic initiative that you've set up in relation to the Muslim Memorial Trust. This is something that's very inspiring, and I'm sure from our listeners and our participants, they will be very much inspired to get involved with this trust. And just to add a name of a serving soldier of the British Army was my own father, who had served in the Second World War, served in Burma, Australia, and had several other tours of duty before he took retirement. So I shall be in touch with you to include his name on your long list of serving British Muslims in the army. Now, I want to open this.
Before I go into just question, I just to assure Lord Sheikh and also our audience that we already built, as from the Muslim Professional Forum, built already an unofficial contact and relationship with Lord Sheikh by our work, because we're working on this issue for last about a year, we can say, and then we sharing the information and sharing the platform. So we already effectively become part of his initiative, and we are hooked to support and continue to provide our platform for everyone to enjoy and recognize our Muslim soldiers' contribution. Thank you.
So as you've started the conversation, Councillor Khaled Noor, why don't you kick off with the first question before I come in with mine?
I think so. You can start now.
All right. Okay. Well, look, I want to put to both of you. Which is, I mean, you've provided a very, very important historical context to the importance of why Muslim serving men and women in both world wars need to be recognized, need to be celebrated. But I want to sort of ask you both as to the extent to which, I mean, if my father hadn't served in the British Army, the stories that he's conveyed about Muslim contributions to the empire I would not have been aware. What I want to sort of ask you is, what's caused this lack of awareness within Muslim communities? And Lord Sheikh, and both of you, Professor Ansari, you've highlighted the importance of education. Now, I suspect education is going to be for both the wider Muslim diaspora as well as the United Kingdom nation as a whole. So, just take us through some of those key challenges as to why younger people, in particular, will not be aware of this contribution that's been made. Lord Sheikh, if I can start with you and come back.
Yes, indeed. It is very unfortunate that this has not been done in the past, but better late than never. And I am very keen that we pursue that further, but I can't do it all by myself.
No.
I need help. I need stakeholders. And whatever I've done in the past, do charitable work, community work, are funded out of my own pocket. But we need not only financial support, but also we need more stakeholders so it becomes a community initiative. This is the reason why we are keen to engage with schools. And as I said, the government is supporting it. Sadiq Khan is supporting it. We have received publicity in newspapers. General Sir Nick Carter has been supporting this. It's a pity. The Sikhs have been very active in this. Now, if you look at the figures I've quoted, during the First World War, the Indian army was made up of 1.3 million. 400,000 were Muslims, and the Sikhs were about 150,000. But they've got 3 memorials already. They are ahead of us. And we need really to be
but let's just touch on that subject.
I'd like to stress one point.
Why are there 4 for the Sikhs and none for the Muslims?
Sorry?
Why are there 4 recognized symbols?
But they've done it themselves. The Sikh
they've done it themselves.
But I think that we need to stress it's not only Muslim from subcontinent of India, because of course Pakistan had not been created at that time. But we must recognize the fact that Muslims came from Africa, even from America, from Malaysia, from Tunisia, Algeria, Ghana, Senegal, produces 200,000 excellent fighting men. So I think we must pay tribute to all the Muslims from all over the world and not confine ourselves to the subcontinent of India.
Thank you, Lord Sheikh. Professor Ansari, just going back to the original question as to the lack of awareness within Muslim communities, not just in the United Kingdom, but worldwide, as to the contribution this has made. Is this a consequence of the Eurocentric educational approaches, or is this something else?
Yeah, I mean, let me be a little provocative here. If one is thinking about, for example, awareness of Muslims from South Asia, Indian soldiers from South Asia fighting in the 2 world wars, then you would find that there isn't really that much interest there, because for a very simple reason. The consciousness is that these were not their wars. They were fighting for somebody else. Yes, of course, they were part of the empire, but they were fighting for somebody else. And they were fighting for all sorts of reasons, but they didn't necessarily consider this to be their war. And to a certain extent, they felt that, there were no commitments made to India's freedom in terms of what would happen for the contribution that these soldiers, the sacrifices that these soldiers were making to the British Empire. And what in fact happened was that there were major protests that took place just after the First World War, precisely because they felt completely let down in terms of what was happening or what was going to happen to India itself. I mean, India was run on an authoritarian level. There were no liberties, there were no rights that were actually available to them, right the way through to India's independence, Pakistan's independence in 1947. And that, I think, was very, very significant. The second thing is that, awareness of minority population's contribution to Britain in all sorts of ways has only come to the fore quite recently. And certainly, looking broadly, if we, certainly from my experience of education, either in schools or in universities, that contribution was not recognized to any degree until quite recently. And so in that broad framework, what one finds is that this particular kind of contribution was also not necessarily swept under the carpet, but to a large extent ignored. And it was not only recently that this whole sort of, if like, discourse has actually changed. And it has changed partly because minority communities, Muslims in Britain, now form a very, very substantial part of the nation. And because they do so, they are beginning to assert their history to a much greater extent. And so a fair amount of that is now beginning to be included in education in terms of awareness of the sorts of contributions they have made to Britain as a nation. And that, I think, is something that is happening more recently and didn't happen in the past. And that is why one finds that, if you like, South Muslim children, going through the education system, weren't aware of these contributions until, quite recently. And that, I think, is very, very important. I mean, things are changing. It's very encouraging that things are changing in that respect. As I said, until 2010, the Muslim Memorial Ground in Woking was lying pretty much derelict. Historic England, England heritage. The organization only begins to take note of this particular place, lying in a totally derelict, dilapidated state, putting some money into it for renovation as the 2014, 2018 centenary commemorations, come to the fore. And that, I think, is something that that is important to recognize. But I think that
Professor Ansari, did they do that as a consequence of them realizing that a significant portion of history was being forgotten, or did they do this as a consequence of pressure from Muslim communities? What stimulated them to doing this?
Yeah, I think there's a dialectic operating here. Obviously, Muslims, either parents or children, in terms of education, and so where are we in all this commemoration that is taking place? Did we play no part in it? And when they start asking those sorts of questions, then clearly that history comes to the fore. But then, of course, quite clearly, there is also a process of inclusivity and inclusion that is beginning to take place in the narratives, in the discourses taking place in wider society. There is recognition that this is an area that has been neglected in the past, but it is important that it should not be done so, because in much more they are recognized, these communities, as part of this realm, and therefore their contribution needs to be recognized in the same way that and equally as is done in with regard to the wider population. So that, if you like, recognition is partly because of the, if you like, pressure that comes from minority communities, Muslim communities, and so on. But also, I think that there is a genuine, recognition within wider society that this should actually happen.
Very good, Professor. I think the next question is going to come from Councillor Khaled Noor.
Well, thank you. Before I ask the question, I just do one observation in here in terms of why is lack of awareness, and this will lead to the question effectively. In terms of our UK's military involvement after Second World War, if I go back to the first Middle East war and the second Middle East war, and then recent involvement of last 20 years in Afghanistan, in somehow create a debate about our rule and military's involvement. And this is causing a debate within ourselves. My understanding is that involvement of whether it's British involvement in the military involvement is a just war. But I think so we have a responsibility as a Muslim community leaders and academics that distinguish that what is just war, what is war unjust or even questionable, because this is creating, my understanding is that as a lack of enthusiasm within our Muslim community. I think the academic like Professor and also Lord Sheikh has a responsibility. So my question too on this regard about that, Lord Sheikh mentioned clearly that one of the objectives of his trust is to combat Islamophobia. But when we discuss about the Islamophobia, also November is the month of Islamophobia Awareness Month. Since the first Middle East war and until now, when you come to the media narrative or discourse of the Muslim community's engagement of the British society and Britishness, the debate started 10, 15 years ago. And this sometimes triggered the issue about the anti-Muslim, or specifically those are young Muslim, that they have some sort of lack of involvement with the British society and Britishness. How we can make a balance on this regard so that we can bring our youth and next generation on board that this is the country we belong to, and at the same time addressing the issue of rising Islamophobia within our society. Thank you.
Who do you want this to answer first? Do you want Professor Ansari to answer this first, or do you want Lord Sheikh to answer?
Lord Sheikh can start answering the question, and then Professor Ansari can come next.
I think this issue of Islamophobia, we need a comprehensive solution. For example, I have raised a question in the House of Lords in about a week's time, pressing for definition of the word Islamophobia. I've taken part in proceedings in the House of Lords regarding the Prevent agenda. But I think it's important that this initiative gets backing not only from the Muslims, but also non-Muslims. Now, when I came up with the idea of setting up the trust, I decided to have two English, very high-profile people on my board of trustees. As I said in my speech, Lord Laxton is actually the deputy speaker in the House of Lords. He's a renowned historian. In fact, he has reviewed both my previous books. And I've also got Major General Fatturuni. You see, when I came up with the idea, I went to see Sir Nick Carter, the Chief of Defence Staff, and I said, Sir Nick, can you recommend a serving British officer to serve on my charity? He said, we can't do that, but he found a Major General. So I think that's important, that this initiative is not only supported by the Muslims, but also non-Muslims. Now, the War Graves Commission published a report in April this year, some of you may be aware of this, to say that the contributions of Black and Asian service personnel who died fighting with the British Empire have not been recognized. So, but I feel that the community must take up this initiative and also get support from other people as well. We can't sit back and say, well, it hasn't been done. Well, it hasn't been done, but it needs to be done. This is so very, very important. And it's got to be done on a continuous basis. This is the reason why we are very, very keen to do educational work, to have the memorial in a prominent place, not tucked away in the corner. And I've had a undertaking from both the government as well as Sadiq Khan that this will be done. So I think that the community must rally together to make this happen. This is our home. I'm British. People ask you, who am I? I'm a British Muslim. And therefore, we should try to do things to promote Islam in every way and to try to have harmony and peace and make people aware of what the Muslims have done to keep this country free. And as I said, to keep the Union Jack flying. And I think really we need to do that collectively.
Thank you, Sheikh, Lord Sheikh. Professor Humayun Ansari, over to you. If you can just short in the answer about 2-3 minutes, please, the maximum.
Yeah, no, I mean, Islamophobia. I think that as Lord Sheikh has said, it's a very complex issue. In terms of, I mean, there's been toing froing about its definition. It remains contentious even after the old parliamentary sort of a group came up with one, which was not accepted by the government. So there is this is part of the kind of sort of like discourse that is continuing and needs to be worked through. As far as, I mean, it's quite important to think about what are the factors which actually lead to Islamophobia, which contribute to Islamophobic sentiment, Islamophobic sort of, if you like, activity within British society. And that, again, is actually quite complex. But one of the sort of, if you like, contributors is the generation of Islamophobia in the media. Not just the social media, but the broadsheets to a lesser extent, but certainly the tabloids to a much greater extent, and that has actually continued for a very, very long time. It is it's more muted now, but it has gone on for a very long time and has become sort of, if you like, embedded to some degree in sort of wider populations' perceptions and the kind of stereotypes that they have about Muslims. And that certainly then, of course, leads to their sort of, if like, feelings about the or hostility to or resentment of Muslims more broadly in society. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is for a greater awareness for the media, if you like, on the broad level, the government also as a major institution in society, to make high profile the sorts of initiatives that Lord Sheikh is taking. The National Muslim, Trust, give it a greater profile, flag it up, talk about what it's is to do with, what its function is, how important it is in terms of integrating broad sections of Muslim society in Britain into the wider framework. That is the kind of thing that needs to be flagged up much more than actually happens at the moment. And as Lord Sheikh said, it would actually contribute to combating Islamophobia if we have that in various arenas like education, in the public sphere, in Parliament, and so on and so forth. But as if that doesn't happen, and it gets, if you like, it's fueled to a certain extent, it continues to be fueled by the broadcast and print media, then that is going to actually remain a problem. Now, the other thing is that Muslim communities themselves need to think about how they can contribute to combating Islamophobia as well. And there, I think that it is quite important to think about, well, for example, in terms of Muslim sacrifices, if you remember, in 2006, there was Jabron Hashmi, Lance Corporal Jabron Hashmi, out there in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban. And he was obviously, his body was brought back, and he was given a heroic burial in Britain, very, very well publicized, honored last post, and so on and so forth, bugles, so on and so. So that is the kind of thing that needs to actually be thought about in terms of what Muslims can bring to this combating of Islamophobia as well. There isn't, I mean, it's a contentious issue. The invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan were very, very contentious. There was a great deal of unhappiness about it. But I think that it's quite important to think about, well, we are British nationals. We are British in every way. This is our home. And so even the religion sort of tells us, our religion tells us that we must obey the laws and contribute to the homeland that we actually live in. And the way to do it is by serving it in as many ways as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Professor, and also Lord Sheikh, thank you for answering. And next question, I'll ask Lutfur Ali to raise this question, please. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. It's, again, I think I'll take the formula of an observation followed by setting the context for the question, which is certainly around the idea of Islamophobia and whether that's contributed to, I mean, I think the latest statistics is that there are about 650 Muslims in the armed forces in the United Kingdom. Is that, I mean, you'll know Professor Ansari better than I. Now, clearly from the interactions that I have with young people within our community, within the Muslim communities, is that there is a significant level of distrust in wanting to join the armed forces. I think some of this is probably also emanating from our scholars and clerics as to, going back to Councillor Khaled Noor's point as to whether it is permissible, whether it's a just war and so on. But there is certainly a high level of skepticism as to whether to join the armed forces and whether it is the right thing to do. Now, notwithstanding all of this, for those of us that have family heritage with strong associations with the armed forces, we can understand the rationale. Now, one of the questions that arises in the historical context is that did some of the Muslims from the subcontinent and other places as part of the British colonies, were they conscripted or did they voluntarily join the armies? That's point number one, because that has an impact on the current situation as to why we should consider, or certainly our children, sons and daughters should consider joining the armed forces. And the other area is around the cultural shift that's taking place at the moment in relation to not only Black Lives Matter, but also with the most recent case with Azim Rafiq and Yorkshire Cricket Club. Him calling out the racism for what it is, the P word being used and only being seen as banter, and the extent to which that level of racism and discrimination permeates British society, that still prevents young people from within the Muslim communities from considering themselves as part and parcel of the British fabric of life.
Yeah. Lord Sheikh, would you like to go first? I'm happy to go on that.
I am encouraging Muslims to join the armed forces. I think we are part of the British community. You see, in the armed forces, you not only have soldiers, but people can join to be doctors, engineers. There are a lot of prospects. And one of the things I have had discussions, I was involved in setting up the Muslim Association of the Armed Forces. General Richards, now Lord Richards, was very much involved in this. And I think that if you're going to live here, this is our home. And we need people to join the armed forces. One of the things I've raised, and I've raised this in the parliament, I've had discussion with Baroness Gouldy. What happens, undoubtedly, that they reach up to the captain level, and above the captain status, of course, we haven't got many ethnic minorities. We've had a rear admiral, we have had a certain high-ranking people. But one of the things I have stressed that they should be treated fairly. I'm not looking for positive discrimination, but they should be treated fully. And I think that we should think about joining the armed forces. Obviously, we can be whatever you want to be. With regard to whether they were conscripted during the First World War, India, when I said India is the undivided India, produced the largest volunteer army, 1.3, and they were volunteer, basically. Now, I mentioned earlier on that my uncle was a sergeant major in King's African Rifles, and I asked him, I was quite young, I spoke to him in my mother tongue is Punjabi, and I asked him, why did he join King's African Rifles? He said, I did it for the king and the empire. This is the reason they gave us, and I'm sure that your relative Ali Saab, obviously, we believed that we should do this for the king and the country. And this is, I think, what's happened. I think the young people must be encouraged. We should become doctors, engineers, but also join the armed forces. And I have said earlier, I have made this point at a very senior level because I also belong to the all-party parliamentary group for armed forces, and I meet the generals, the RAF people. We got Chief of Army Staff in the House of Lords. We got Lord West, who used to be the first Sea Lord. So I discussed with them that it's important that I'm not asking for positive discrimination, but I would like our people to be treated fairly. Now, I've traveled 70% of the world, and I can tell you this. This is a country which people of all races, all religions, are not only tolerated but accepted. When you go to other countries, you see there is far more discrimination. I don't say there isn't any discrimination, but I think we discuss these issues in Parliament. Anything now, I have talking about cricket. I've tabled a question to me, if I can get it, a motion that look, we should look at issues relating to racism in cricket. You don't expect cricket. There is such a thing. It is not cricket. For this to banter, no, it's not banter. It's insult, to be honest. And that thing.
Now, I raise this by way of indication as to the prevalence within the underbelly of British culture, of racism, of Islamophobia. I mean, those of us that have been born here, brought up here, as you say, Lord Sheikh, things have changed dramatically in terms of society. I am no longer chased down the street on the way to school or on the way back from school by the National Front or the British National Party, because that was the experience. My sort of formative years of life and existence was fear of being attacked by right-wing groups going to school on the way back from school. So this is no longer the case, but things are much more subtle now, much subtle in terms of the microaggressions that we experience on a day-to-day basis, whether it's at work or whether it's when we're boarding the tube or transport and so on. Those are the kinds of things that I think increasingly are affecting the second, third, and potentially fourth generation Muslims in this country, in terms of their participation in public life, in terms of their participation in relation to today's conversation, which is around the armed forces, because this is still continuing in a different form, in a different guise, but it is equally as pernicious as it has been in terms of the structural and direct racism and discrimination and Islamophobia faced 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So Professor Ansari, coming back to you, going forward, what is it that we need to be looking to do?
Just going back to what we were talking about, what Lord Sheikh was talking about. The situation in the armed forces is not that different from the situation in the police service, and quite clearly, it is well recognized that there is a huge amount of certainly institutionalized systemic racism, discrimination that continues to play a very negative role in these institutions. And so one of the important things that needs to happen is that not only should these institutions, the armed forces, the police, and so on, recognize the gravity of the situation within these institutions, but also take very, very strong, powerful action, not just words, as has been the case, for a long time, but actual action that then can be evaluated in terms of the outcomes that actually take place. And quite clearly, one of the outcomes is the one that you have just mentioned: 650, out of an army of 80 or 200, 100,000 is minuscule. So unless policies then lead to a great deal more inclusion, recruitment, and so on and so forth, people feel comfortable in doing that, and then of course is proven, demonstrated by more people from these communities joining the armed forces, really the test has not been passed. It's as simple as that. Now, I think it's quite important to think about, I think Councillor Khaled Noor talked about the just war theory. It's quite important to think about, what is a just war? How do we think about a war, either the First World War or the Second World War, as just wars? Well, there are, in fact, very certainly, as far as Muslims, there are very clear conditions that have to be met for that to actually happen, particularly the war must be declared openly by proper sovereign authority, for example, the governing authority or political community in question. The war must have a just cause, for example, defense of the common good or a response to grave injustice. 3, the warring state must have just intentions. For example, that is, must not wage war for justice rather than for self-interest. And 4, the aim of the war must be the establishment of a just peace. Okay, so those are the sort of, if you like, conditions that have to be met for these communities to accept these being a just war. Now, I think it's quite clear that most Muslims at the time thought that jihad. These were secular wars, nothing to do with religion. But and that has been the case right across the world. So if it's not just a question of if you like, non-Muslims fighting Muslims, there's a huge amount of conflict that has taken place. Iraq versus Iran. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims died in that conflict. Who was that? Again, these were Muslim countries fighting each other. Right. Could that be considered just war in any case? In any sense? No. And the last thing about the P word, Azim Rafiq. I mean, you are aware that my son actually played. Zafar Ansari played for England.
That's right.
In India. So this is something that I'm hugely, interested in. And it seems to me that those issues to do with belongingness, being part of the community, part of this realm, are the ones that seem to be still in play. For these players or for this institution to treat, now that it has been accepted that he suffered bullying and racial harassment even by the investigation that started first. Why should these and the way that it happened was through these kinds of things, taunts, slurs such as the P word. And so really, how much progress have we actually made in that regard if in 2021 we are actually confronted with such issues? And that, I think, is actually very, very important. Because if communities in Britain actually think that this is still happening, in places which actually deny to a very great extent any racism and so on, then are they not likely to actually also think that this is happening much, much more, if you like, covertly rather than overtly, less blatantly than has been sort of, if you like, demonstrated in this particular sort of story, that this is something, still part of British society? And if so, then it is hugely damaging.
Thank you, Professor Ansari. I know we're running slightly over time, but I promise you we're going to conclude in the next few minutes with the final question coming from Councillor Khaled Noor. But just wanted to sort of qualify and contextualize one of the points that you make, which is in relation to balancing that actually what Lord Sheikh had said earlier, that we've come a long way. We have come a long, long way from the 60s and 70s. Great deal of progress has been made, but not enough. A great deal more needs to be done, which is the point that you are making, Professor Ansari, which is the journey has not yet been concluded. And I think this is quite an interesting moment in time, given that we've had the Black Lives Matter movement, we've had George Floyd's murder. There's, the issue currently, which is being highlighting the racism factor, which is around Azim Rafiq and the cricket board. All these things point to, potentially a significant moment in time where I think, Lord Sheikh, you will be better placed to be able to comment on this in terms of the parliamentary conversations and discussions taking place as to what the government is going to be doing, how it's going to be taking this very, very seriously. Because in the context of the armed forces, our lack of contribution now is abysmal. It's ridiculous. We should be participating. My father had no difficulty participating as a member of the British Armed Forces many, many years ago. And he was a cleric, he was a scholar, he was an imam, he was an alim, but he thought it was necessary to defend the realm against the forces of, what that existed at the time. So it's very, very important that that kind of educational piece is also out there. So Councillor Khaled Noor, if you can just ask your last question, please, and then make any concluding remarks following that.
Well, thank you. The following your question, contribution, and Professor Ansari's answer in terms of that, yes, the work just started, and we are far away have to go to conclude or find a common ground and bringing our communities together. But in terms of the education, what the Lord Sheikh mentioned, and we discussed that we are educating our communities and educating the mainstream as well, because this is the both way approach, because knowledge is coming down because government is maintaining the curriculum, education system as a college, school, college, university up to this and research level. In terms of the changing the curriculum, because if anything to change institutionally, what we discuss about institutional racism is to start from the educational curriculum as well. Lord Sheikh, to question to you is a simple question. What we collectively do as a campaigner, and what in the to academic level to Professor Ansari, what you and people like you, the researching in this field, can do to change and also put some input for a tangible benefit in this regard. Thank you.
I think I'd like to, I became president of my professional body at a very young age. I was the first non-white person to become a president of Chartered Insurance Institute. The point I'm making is that if you want to effect change, you have to try to effect change from within in a quiet way. And this is very much my style. What I try to do is from within. This is the reason I talk to the police officers, I talk to the army, and therefore there are things to be done. I don't say that this is a perfect society, but compared to other countries, we are in a better position. So you have to try to do it from within, and that is very, very, very important. But as a politician, I try to do the best I can. I just give you one example. At the request of the president of Uzbekistan, I've set up Imam Bukhari Foundation, because we want to explain the hadith of Imam Bukhari. I was at a meeting where somebody said to me, Lord Sheikh, Islam should be reformed, a Muslim. And I said to myself, what nonsense. You cannot reform Islam because what's written in the Holy Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what it needs to be done is explaining what Islam is all about. Now, there was a academic who translated Islam into English, and he approached me and he said he wanted to give this Holy Quran to parliamentarians. Would I come and speak? I thought there was a marvelous idea. And I think what sometimes arises is lack of understanding. People don't understand what Islam is all about. And what our job as Muslim leaders is to explain Islam, the fact that there is a tiny minority who perhaps don't understand what Islam is all about. So it's our responsibility, doesn't really matter. All right, I'm a Muslim leader, I'm a parliamentarian, but everyone should try to explain to others what Islam is all about. And it's up to us really to be able to do that. But it is a journey which needs to be followed. And I think that hopefully things will get better.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yes. What can we do? Well, as you know, I'm an historian and an educationist, and so the contribution that I make is in the sphere of education. So, as you know, I try to develop an historical awareness of Islam and Muslims in globally, if you like. The courses that I run for masters, the supervisions that I carry out for my postgraduate PhD students, the courses that I run for the undergraduates are actually focused on disseminating as much knowledge and learning about the Muslims, both here in Europe, in the West, but also globally. And I think that education is actually fundamental to try to develop an understanding among the various populations, the variety of people who inhabit these islands. So, and that needs to be supercharged. That needs to be increased, developed in all sorts of ways, as much as we possibly can. Because once we begin to do that, we bring about, if you like, long-term change rather than short-term sort of, if you like, impact. I think that the initiative that Lord Sheikh has taken on is actually an extremely important one, because again, it becomes part of this idea of education. And within that, I think, symbolic sort of, if you like, recognition is or needs to take place. So my final comment is really to do with remembrance, because that is what is happening, in a week's time. And to think about it, well, how has that changed historically in terms of Muslim communities? And what we find is that it's become increasingly prominent broadly as part of British society. And what is relevant for us is that this has happened at a time when British society is becoming more multicultural, because that's the context that, in fact, your title sort of gave me. It is becoming more diverse. And in this context, the values of remembrance show a strong and growing potential to bring our society together, even in the wake of more recent controversial conflicts that I mentioned, such as Afghanistan and Iraq. So there are 3 points to note. First, as I've tried to show in my presentation, that remembrance has become increasingly inclusive. both in our understanding of the major conflicts of the last century and in shared participation in its rituals, commemorations across contemporary British society. Second, the multi-ethnic nature of the army that fought and the soldiers who died in both world wars also represents the shared history of the diverse British society we were to become, that we are now. This was perhaps somewhat neglected for some decades, but is increasingly part of our mainstream national history now, reflecting the fact that the ethnic composition of the armies which fought in the First World War has more in common with the multi-ethnic makeup of the Britain of 2021 more than that of 1921. So there is that progress taking place. And finally, there is also broad public agreement on the values that the centenary that I've just been talking about should reflect. Peace, a chance to learn, recognizing sacrifice, promoting reconciliation. And on this, 80% of people believe it is important for integration in Britain today that we should know about the history of Commonwealth troops, with only a very minuscule 4% dissenting from this. So that, I think, is very, very important as we actually approach this very, very important occasion.
What wonderful concluding remarks on your part, Professor Ansari. And if I can just invite a last few seconds of your concluding remarks from you, Lord Sheikh, and then we will finish off with a conclusion from Councillor Khaled Noor for this evening's event. Lord Sheikh.
Yeah, indeed. I would just like to reiterate that we are looking for support in whatever way you can. And it's I can't do it by myself. The trustees can't do it by themselves. And therefore, we'll be looking or asking and requesting support in whatever way we can. I just give you one example. I was giving a talk in Manchester. And an architect came and saw me and he says, Lord Sheikh, I tell you what I can do. I can draw the memorial, the architecture I can draw, because of course we can't have human forms. So in whatever way you can, certainly please get in touch with me. Any support you give us would be very helpful. Any financial support we get, we are issuing quarterly bulletins. I've got Muhammad Amin, who, as I said, is a chartered accountant. He used to be a partner in the city firm. He's looking after governance. I'm a fanatic on governance. I do have my own family charity, and we need to ensure that everything is above board, everything is accounted for, and that is how this charity is going to function on proper basis, undoubtedly. And we'll be issuing bulletins to all our contributors. So I hope that people who are listening and seeing me today would very much appreciate support from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Sheikh. And I'm sure that appeal will be taken very, very seriously by the participants today, but not just today. I'm sure a lot of us will go back and share the sentiments that you have both conveyed. And I think it's a very, very important initiative that you're taking forward. And certainly, Councillor Khaled Noor, myself, we're available at your service in whatever we can do to support you taking this forward. And I'm sure we'll be having conversations after this. Councillor Khaled Noor.
I would appreciate that. I would welcome that very much, really. Every bit will help.
No, I mean, we can bring together whatever links and resources that we have that we can access. Certainly from a sort of local government perspective, I've spent the last 30 years working within that arena as well as the civil service. So we'll see how we can assist you. But just to sort of say that both of your contributions have enlightened us. It's been insightful. We're very much the richer for this. Councillor Khaled Noor, if you want to say last few words before we conclude.
Thank you very much. We are very grateful to our speakers, especially Lord Sheikh and also Professor Humayun Ansari. The discussion we have this afternoon, we are a little bit running late, but I think so it was useful and effective. We try our best to provide this platform to share ideas and information. I think so those are listening via Facebook Live and social media. This link is always available, and hope that you find some of the discussion is useful and beneficial for our communities. In terms of the Remembrance Sunday, that is the next Sunday, 14th of November, it is, as Professor clearly mentioned, is become the more diverse and more engaging with the community. My understanding is that we as a Muslim community, as a part of this parcel of the society, we should take part of the celebration. It is our celebration. In terms of as a going forward, I think so it's very important for change should come within us, and also government should take some responsibility as well to educational level. We need to think about how we can include some of the information that Lord Sheikh gathered, and also research come from Professor Humayun Ansari to feed into our school level, secondary level, college level, that can our teachers and everyone can learn from these things. And so in this regard, also our Muslim community leaders, faith leaders, especially our institution, mosque, Islamic charities and organizations, should do their best as well to publicize this, because unless until we raise awareness within ourselves, no one is raise awareness for us as well. This is all about. Finally, I want to say that this is Islamophobia awareness month, and I think so we all should take part of discussion different level. And from Muslim professional point of view, we try this event as a part of this awareness as well in collective benefit. And inshallah, Lord Sheikh, with your after this meeting, we try to discuss how we can take your project further, and also we can contribute together for remembering our heroes, those give their life selflessly. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all at our next event, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum and good evening.
Wa alaikum salam.